Hi, welcome to Lighthouse Living Room. Sorry about last week, if you missed our time together. Unfortunately, I could not speak to you because I couldn't talk. I had caught this stuff and it plugged me up to the point where I finally got to a point where I could hardly speak, and it was very difficult and very sore. Anyway, hopefully that's behind us, and so I wanted to get started again with what we were talking about the week prior to that. So this was 2 weeks ago. And I was talking about being offended. And it's kind of interesting that in our study that I'm putting together right now about unforgiveness, a lot of what we're going to be talking about, on Wednesday nights for the next several weeks is going to be talk about some of the things that we're going to be actually talking about in Bible study that we're going to be doing, or I should say, biblical study on unforgiveness and not forgiving yourself or your person. And it's going to be incredibly interesting, and I think you're going to find that a lot of people are going to, you're going to have your mind blown in a lot of different ways, unlike how Rabbi does, where he says he's just going to totally unsaddle you anyway. So getting back to what we were talking about, being offended, and I mentioned, and I want to go over this just briefly because it ties with what we're going to be talking about, being offended, or mass amount of people are going to be offended. Now, one of the things that we need to remember from what we talked about last 2 weeks ago is that it is impossible that no offenses should come. In other words, in Luke 17:1 that I mentioned, it said that there is going to be offenses in life that you're going to have to deal with, whether you believe that or not, or whether or not you're in a place where you can relate to this, is that in life there will be people who will offend you, and you may actually offend others. And there are things that you need to do about that, because this is a trap of the enemy. In Luke chapter 17, verse 1, it talks about is that, in fact, let me get to that in just a moment, but I want to read to you 2 Timothy 2:24, 25, and 26. It says, "And a servant of the Lord must not quarrel, but be gentle to all, and able to teach, patient in humility, correcting those who are in opposition, if God perhaps will grant them repentance, so that they may know the truth, and then they may come to their senses and escape the snare or entrapment of the devil, being taken captive by him to do his will." One of the things that happens when we become offended, it's a very interesting word. It's called skandalon, that's the Greek, which means to refer to the part of the trap which is sprung that captures a person in one of their limbs. In other words, the trap looks kind of like the old-fashioned one that maybe when you were a kid, if you're a boy. Again, by the way, there's only two genders. It's male and female, whether we like it or not. But if you were a guy, you were taught to make a trap that was made by bending of a branch down where there's tension to a stake that is cut in a way that you could intertwine it like this, and it would lock and would hold that limb down with a rope on it, and then it would go into an oval with a slip knot on it, so that when somebody would come along, it would trip that, and the branch would then come up, and the rope would be pulled with it, going around someone's limb, and then it would capture the prey, whatever the prey happened to be. This is exactly what's being talked about here, about what the devil does in regards to trapping people into offenses. And an offense is a trap. It is actually an offensive weapon done by the enemy to create a trap for you as an individual, so that you cannot be released from unless someone helps you with that. Who is that helps you? That would be, of course, the Spirit of God and His Word. Now, the heart's true condition is one of the things that I find very interesting to challenge us with, that I talked about 2 weeks ago, is pride. One of the things that we need to understand is that with pride, we try to justify our position. what I'm going to get into, I'm only going to spend a few more minutes on this thought of going back through what we had already talked about 2 weeks ago, just to get us familiar again. But what's interesting, and I find hard for people to believe, is that no matter what the scenario is, we can divide all offended people into two major categories. The one is those who have been treated unjustly, which sometimes that happens, and sometimes we are caught up in this trap of being offended and not letting go with that. Pride sometimes keeps us from doing that. The second one is that those who believe that they have been treated unjustly, but people in the second category believe that their hearts, that they have been wronged, and often come to the conclusion, not based on facts, but what they believe to be an offense against them, in which case, especially if it's been offered by another individual or maybe by a corporation or even by the government, what we find happening is people don't understand is that we've been sucked into this trap, and because of our pride, not admitting that we didn't know what was going on, we just immediately go into this offended mode, victimhood type situation. Now, I want you to understand a couple of things, that pride makes you view yourself as a victim. Your attitude becomes, I've been mistreated, misjudged, therefore I am justified in my behavior. Well, according to Scripture, there is no way that we can be justified in being offended. Because if someone has offended you and you have been put in a place where you sense that you've been offended, and you take that on, what you have done is you've just put the shackles on your arms or around your wrists and create an atmosphere in which you cannot feel any relief from that. And the only way that you're going to feel relief is this person or this government or this agency or this situation has to be redeemed through them admitting that that would happen. So my question to you would be, what if they will not? What if they will not even acknowledge that there was a problem? And I find that that's one of the things that you find hard to understand. But in 1 Peter 1, 6 and 7, this is something that I think that is pretty amazing, because you have to know what your true condition is. You have to know what it is that actually happened. Through my study and through diving into, actually I'm looking at 7 different books that I'm looking information into to put this Bible study together, or this biblical study on unforgiveness, or forgiveness, if you will, positive side, unforgiveness, the negative side. I have found out something that I have been struggling with for almost 28 years, and almost 30 years now. And I did not realize was a problem. And all of a sudden, out of the clear blue, clarity came to that through the study. So if the Bible study will help anyone at all, it has already helped me. And the reason why it's helped me is that I figured out why I am so upset with a certain set of individuals in my time when I was in Bella Vista, California, as I was pastoring up there. And I'm not at a place where I can share this, but I will say this: it was incredibly freeing, incredibly revealing, and revelation came from that, where it took me to an area in my life that was a challenge. And now I understand all of these years through ministry why I react a certain way in situations when it comes to groups. And it's been very powerful. So be encouraged. This is coming in the next probably 3, 4, maybe 4 weeks from now. We will start that study, even if it's in the middle of summer. I just believe that it's that powerful that it will do an amazing amount of good for those that are out there, especially if you have not figured out how to forgive yourself for things that you think you're responsible for. It's very interesting. In 1 Peter 1, 6 through 7 says this: "In this you will greatly rejoice, though now, for a little while, if need be, you have been grieved by various trials." I think we can all relate to that. "The genuineness of your faith, being much more precious than gold that perishes, though it is tested by fire, may be found to praise, honor, and glory at the revelation of Jesus Christ. Now, in that sense, we need to understand, what is your true condition? How do you respond to certain people? Have you found yourself in a situation where unforgiveness has happened? You can't forgive a certain situation, and I stressed this last week, and I want to stress this some more as I'm giving it already too much time, but I need to stress this. When you have been wronged by someone, especially in the church, especially someone who claims to be a Christian, that loves you unconditionally. Many times it's pastoral, sometimes it'd be a staff member, or it could be just somebody in the congregation. When you feel like you have been wronged in such a way and you can not forgive them, and let's say, for instance, it actually did happen. You were definitely wronged. And you don't get any satisfaction because of the fact that they will not admit it, number one. Number two, they don't even understand or know that they had done that to you, or the situation has just gone along and you've kind of ignored it, but it's festered in you. And you allow yourself to become, and you finally forgive this person in your heart, or you think you have, that relationship will never be the same. I don't care who you are. I don't care what you think. None of us are perfect. We all live in the flesh a lot. And you think that because you've forgiven this person that all of a sudden God is going to come wash over you and everything's going to be just the way it was. It will never be the same. Now, why do I say that? It's because I've lived through this. And in my experience, for it to become the same, you have to start at rock bottom and work your way back into a relationship, even if it's a family member. Now, I know this sounds harsh, but you know, the mother's love oversees everything. There's no wrongs and all of that. I mean, you know, we've heard a story about the mother who has a son who's in prison that has murdered 100 people, and her love for her son is still unconditional. Well, believe me, inside of her heart, inside of that person, there are things that will never be the same, and you have to get to rock bottom and work your way back into that relationship until you get back to where you were at the time that you were offended, before you can go past it and begin to realize a new relationship with that individual. Now, I know that sounds very weird and harsh, but the truth is, this is what Jesus is trying to teach us. This is what Jesus was trying to say when he said, love your neighbor as yourself. Now, how hard is that? Very. One of the things that I find in my life, that the only way that I can replace this, and it's being said as we get into the second portion of the study, being offended is really easy, especially if we're touchy-feely, especially if we deal with things in a way where we're interacting with people all the time. There's always going to be something that's going to be said that's not going to be appreciated. And some people are so forward and sometimes brutally honest that they will offend people, and that's just kind of how it is. But what I want to say to you is, be encouraged, because it says to buy gold that's been refined in the fire, which means it's pure. Gold, in its basic state, has things in it that are not pure: nickel, lead, cadmium. There's a zillion, magnesium, other things that makes gold, if you will, harder. Now, what's interesting about gold is that when you heat it, all of the stuff that's in it begins to float to the top, and when it does, they take and they scrape that off. In other words, the different metals, they float to the top, and then they are taken off and cast aside. In our offenses, we need to buy the gold Jesus speaks about in Revelation chapter 3 and allow it to be heated so that the impurities of that unconditional forgiveness and love for other people begins to be purified. And when that happens, we begin to operate in a different mode of understanding and a different mode of caring for other people. Now, as a pastor or as a leader or as somebody that's head of the family, and believe me, that can be a male or a female, because sometimes some males are not leaders, frankly. They should be, but they're not. And who has to take that role over in the growth of a family sometimes is the woman. And which is, it's not order of the Lord that way, but God allows that to take place and gives them authority where they didn't have authority before, because they have taken that role on. And it's a godly role, because this is what God has planned. This is how it's supposed to be. There's supposed to be one leader. There's supposed to be somebody to look to, and et cetera. And believe me, single parent homes are a challenge. And it's obvious that there's damage that's happened to the children because of the fact that the male has not taken that role as leader and let the mom become the leader, or circumvented that, which is another story altogether, and we become offended, and we don't realize that we're offended. We don't even realize that we have been offended until you have your own family, and then you start to mimic the things that you saw in the family you grew up with, because that's the only experience we had. I know I'm talking to people tonight, so I'm just letting you know, understand that there are things that has to change to make the way God intended things to be the way that they should be, because that's when harmony and peace and everything else kind of works its way through. Now, taking that to the next level, I want to take us to our next part of the study that I really wanted to get to tonight. I want to talk about massive offenses. Massive offense. Matthew 24:10 through 13 says this. Follow with me now. If you got something to write with, you need to write these things down and then read them later and refresh your memory about what's been said, or listen to this broadcast again. Listen to the one 2 weeks ago again, so that you get to speed with this, because this is massively important. I know that there's going to be a coming of a massive swing of the pendulum back to righteousness, moral clarity, and centeredness. Not far right, not this nonsense that we keep hearing from the church that's saying everything is going to be like this, and there's going to be rule and all. No, God never talked about having an iron hand. He never did. He talked about loving each other like you wanted to be loved. He talked about always having an answer, always being able to deal with opposition, bring it out into the open, and if you win that, brother, and we're going to talk about that a little bit tonight. We're talking about massive offense. Look what it says in Matthew chapter 24, verses 10 through 13. And then many will be offended, will betray one another, will hate one another. Then many false prophets will rise up and deceive many. And because the lawlessness will abound, because lawlessness, if we're not talking about today, I don't know what we're talking about. He said, will deceive many, because lawlessness will abound, and the love of many will grow cold. But he who endures to the end shall be saved. Now, the sign of the times that we say that many will be offended, not a few, not some, many. Now, many to me would be more than half. That's 6 out of 10. 60% will be offended. We see this happening in the churches today. We see this happening in Ventura County. There's some things going on in Ventura County in some of the churches right now that is, to me, incredibly offensive to me, because of the fact they're in the gay and lesbian community, which, we need to love them like we love ourselves. Oh, how can you do it? It's easy, because you don't know where they've been, number one, and you don't know whether they've ever had the opportunity to accept Christ. And if they do accept Christ, then they will leave that type of morality and become, I don't know, I don't like to use the word straight, because there's no such animal as that. But my saying is that they will come back into the community of life and be morally centered and morally equivalent. But here's what's interesting about this whole thing. The love of many will grow cold. And what I see happening in our county, in our vicinity, or churches are baptizing those that are in the gay and lesbian community and then letting them be part of the congregation. This is not scriptural, period. And you may not like what I'm saying, but the fact is it is not scriptural. Not only is it not scriptural, it's dangerous. Why is it dangerous? Because there are a lot of young people that are out there that are being manipulated by the mainstream media saying that all of this is normal. It is not normal, and it's not going to be normal. It will never be normal. According to Jesus, it will never be normal. But what I'm trying to tell you is that the love of many will grow cold. Why? Because of this very reason. We see this happening right now. I just had a conversation with somebody in my congregation this weekend, where he was talking about somebody, a cousin or an uncle or whatever who it was said that this person said that they were a Christian. Okay, well then the question was asked, how do you know you're a Christian? Well, because I'm a good person. No, that's not how you become a Christian. A Christian, you give your life to Jesus and you turn your life around and you start living for Christ. Well, he was saying, but I can do whatever I want. I can sleep around, drink around, play around, and I'm cool. Well, unfortunately, that doesn't fit the narrative. It does not fit what Christ was talking about. So I want to define for you what kind of love that Jesus was trying to tell us. So what is the massive offense coming from? What do we see happening in the world today that is making everybody feel like they are okay to do whatever they want and yet feel like they are part of God's kingdom? It's massively sad to see this going on as a pastor, knowing full well that they're jeopardizing their lives, because I don't want anybody to go to hell. I don't want anybody to suffer what comes from the baggage that you produce by being offended. Not to mention the fact that your life begins to be changed and your health actually is in jeopardy, that your health can be impacted. And you don't understand why you're sick all the time when you find out that early in life, things we don't remember, like it's kind of like the iceberg effect, where you only see this much of the iceberg and there's this much underwater, and they can't understand why a ship will sink when it gets close to that iceberg, because the bottom gets torn out, because the ship cannot take the shearing that happens when an iceberg takes the bottom of their boat out. You don't stay afloat very long. In other words, you sink. But they didn't see it coming. Titanic, a great example. What I'm trying to say is that much that happens in life is not visible. Much that happens in life that affects us in a way that is detrimental to us happened when we were young or when we were in our impressionable times. Something happened that we have buried and covered up and we can't see because it's below water. You follow what I'm saying? And these things need to be brought to the surface, and then you need to address them the way Jesus addressed unforgiveness. He forgave. How did he happen? By loving. So let's take a look at the words love that I'm talking about. Now, who are these offended people? Is it Christians or just society in general? No, it's none of those things. We find the answer when we continue to read, because lawlessness will abound, the love, L-O-V-E, in English, it is actually in the Greek that it was written. So the word love stands for two forms of love. Remember, I think there's six actual terms of love in the Greek. The two that they're talking about, one is phileo, which is between brother and sister, not family members, but people in the congregation, people that you know. That's that love that you have, which is actually kind of conditional. And then on the other hand, then there is agape, which means that I love somebody no matter what, and I love them even if I don't receive love in return, okay? Now, phileo defines love among friends. It's affectionate love that is conditional. Phileo says, and this is an easy way of understanding phileo love, scratch my back and I'll scratch yours. You treat me kindly, I'll treat you kindly. You follow that? That's the kind of love that's being spoke about here. But it's also talking about another one, agape, the love God sheds abroad in the hearts of his children. The same love that is given to us unconditionally by Jesus himself. Now, it's not based on performance, even if it's ever returned. So we need to understand, without God, we can only love with selfish love. Without the Spirit of God, we can only love with selfish love. In other words, if I give to you, I expect to get something in return. Phileo. Agape is love that is given no matter what happens. This is the love of a mother to a son that's in prison that I just talked about. Son's a nitwit, bonehead, done stupid things, hurt a lot of people, and he's paying his debt to society because that's what happens. So that's not social justice that everybody gets the same thing. This is what justice looks like when somebody has done something wrong, they pay the piper, or basically society. But a mother's love still going to love that boy until the bitter end because she gives it unconditionally. Jesus does the same. He gives to us unconditionally. He loves us despite our performance. Now, so many of the many Jesus refers to Christians, to those agape, has grown cold. And what do I mean by that is that they've just stopped serving God. They don't see any benefit in it. And it's kind of interesting that, sometimes you're done. You never got that where? Well, for me, sometimes you just get done where you just can't give any more to that individual. I'll give you a great example. I had, as pastoring, in my early time in pastoring, I would call and chat with several different people and that were pastors at the time. And one of those pastors said something to someone, somebody who was close to me, came and told me what this gentleman said about me. He said that Pastor Mark was very needy. That offended me to no end. Even today, that bothers me a little bit. Why does it bother me? Because I thought that I was in confidence trying to get response back, and his response to me was such and such, and I felt that we had some kind of rapport. But what he saw was that I was a very needy person. In other words, I was a high-maintenance person. And to have that come back, I don't know about you, what would you think if someone said that about you? Oh, you're a high-maintenance person, or you're a very needy person. Well, that bothered me a lot. So I find it interesting for how you love someone or how you care for someone, that if you're expecting that in return, you're not at the agape level. You're at the phileo level. Now, I hope this makes sense to you, and I hope that you understand that I am not trying to be critical, and I hope you are not offended by this. But the fact is, you need to get over that. You need to get over the fact that you should expect something for giving something, because that is selfish. That is fleshly love. That is not godly love. Now, I know that that's hard to believe, pastor saying that, but the fact is that that's exactly what it is. Sometimes we need to understand that we should give up great expectations, or, how can I say, maybe more to the point, what do you expect in return for what you're giving? If you expect something in return, then you're no different than the other guy down the street. I'll give you an example based on finances. The Bible tells us, now I know you're going to probably go, that's not in there. It's in Proverbs. It says that if you give something to someone or loan somebody money, you are not to expect that in return. Now, America, capitalism, if you will, if I borrow money from a bank, they expect me to pay it back and pay it back with interest. This is kind of a form of phileo love. In other words, if you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. I'll give you this money for this amount of time, but it's going to cost you this to get it. If I love someone conditionally and I'm expecting love in return, you might as well do yourself a big favor. You're going to be offended because it ain't going to happen. And when somebody doesn't pay you back, it's fascinating that people kind of freak out, and then they start spreading the word, don't loan that guy money or that gal money. Well, what I'm trying to say to you is that in a spiritual standpoint, if that person comes back to you and asks money and you loan him money again and he doesn't pay you back, that's on you. Not on them, it's on you. You should know better. But on the other hand, according to Scripture, if we want to take it and be legalistic with it, you should go ahead and loan them more money. I know that sounds crazy because this is a crazy teaching because of the fact that it is true. Now, one of the things that we need to have is that we should have no expectation about someone or anything given is a blessing and not something owed. In other words, if I give to someone, then I should not expect it in return. Now, here's some things that I need you to understand about being offended, especially when we talk about massive offense. The church today, massive offense. People don't want to say I'm a Christian. People don't want to say I'm a believer. People, and my girls both have told me that I need to take the sticker that's on the back of my truck that says church is essential. I have to tell you that in the last couple of months, I've had many people come to me and comment on that in a positive way that I thought was really kind of shocking. But I am to a point now where I think it probably would be wise for me to not have that on there, simply because of the fact that the people that are out there today will make a judgment about my driving and then equate it that all Christians drive like Pastor Mark. Well, I got a big red truck, so you can kind of get an idea how I drive, just saying. So I want you to understand the concept of what's going on. So you need to be drawn by what I'm saying and understand that this is very important. Now, in Proverbs chapter 18, verse 19, listen to this. This will blow your mind. In fact, this will actually, I hope, open your mind to how you should react to certain things that happen in your life when we talk about offenses. Now remember, Satan is trying to bait you, trap you, set a snare, capture you in offense, and then beat you with the offense so that you become bitter and you become changed for the worse. Jesus is trying to tell you, you need to forgive immediately. You need to stop thinking about getting something in return, phileo, and start thinking in agape, which means I love you no matter what. Are you following me? I mean, I know this is going to be hard for some of you to accept, but I'm just saying. Proverbs 18, verse 19. A brother offended is harder to win than a strong city, and contentions are like the bars of a castle. Let's dissect this a little bit. A brother offended is harder to win than a strong city, and contentions are like the bars of a castle. Now, an offended brother or sister is harder to win than a fortified city. The strong cities had walls around them. The walls were the city's assurance of protection. So what happens when someone is offended in this way, and you offend, especially somebody within the body of Christ, they will throw up walls and bars, and they will protect themselves thinking that it is protecting themselves, when in reality they're putting themselves in prison. And they will automatically do this without even thinking twice. Now, I know that we think that putting walls up when we're hurt will safeguard our heart and prevents future wounds. But when we do this, we become selective, denying entry to all we fear will hurt us. let me share something with you. Maybe I can make this kind of clear. Now, I know that it's interesting that people don't think this happens, but we do it. Because what we do is those people that we think that are on our side can come in through the gate. And they get into our inner circle and we begin to interact with them. Because we feel, listen carefully what I'm saying, safe with them. When the reality is they're as dangerous as the person who has offended you. Why? Because now they're closer to you, and the enemy can, and many times does, use those people to set a trap in which you're snared in. Now, the Sea of Galilee, which is a very interesting place, freely receives water and freely gives it out. And it pushes it into a river called the Jordan. And the Jordan takes that water, and that water runs several miles until it goes into a place called the Dead Sea. Now, I want you to understand the Sea of Galilee is full of all kinds of, I think there's 7 kinds of fish in the Sea of Galilee. They're kind of sardine-ish type of fish, all different sizes, but they're plentiful. There's lots of them. How many times do we read in the Bible where Jesus said, oh, put the net on the other side? You know, and they counted the fish. Now, what's interesting about that, if you take a look at it in Gematria, that there's a reason why they did that. And there's a reason why they used a certain number. And the fact is it has everything to do with glorifying God through that situation. So the Sea of Galilee would be considered a living thing. It would be considered growing, always multiplying. Why? Because it freely gives and freely receives. Freely gives and freely receives. So if I'm freely giving my love to someone and freely receiving love back, that's wonderful and terrific. We like that. But what happens when there is no more giving back? For instance, when the Jordan River and the water that brings life is flowing and comes down and goes into the Dead Sea, there's a reason why they call it the Dead Sea, because it doesn't go anywhere. It does not go out of that. In other words, that sea is dying. So what happens when you only receive something, or thinking your expectation is receiving something, you will find yourself eventually dying, even though the water that's there is still there. Now, understand that there's other things that go on within the ecosystem that's there, but the point that I'm making is that you need to understand that giving something and receiving something is not always the way it will happen. Now, in 2 Corinthians 10, 4 and 5, I think a lot of you know the scripture I'm talking about. For the weapons of our warfare are not carnal, but mighty through God for the pulling down of strongholds, casting down arguments and every high thing that exalts itself against the knowledge of God, bringing every thought into captivity to the obedience of Christ. So an offended Christian is one who takes in life, but because of fear, cannot release life. As a result, even the life that does come in becomes stagnant within them, within the wall or the prison of the offense. The New Testament describes these walls as strongholds. Strongholds are a place where something is hidden and then only comes out when it wants to do evil. Let me give you a great example. During the time of the conquest of Canaan and taking the land that God would promise to the people of Israel, the guys that were in charge, in a couple of cases, did not completely kill everyone that was in those cities, even though they were told to do so. Some people got away. What happened? They actually went into the hills and hid themselves, and it became guerrilla warfare. So what happened was that they created strongholds in which were hidden from the people that were in the valleys, and they would come out at night, and then they would rob them blind. This is exactly what we're talking about. He says, for the weapons of our warfare are not carnal, but mighty through God for the pulling down of strongholds, things that are hidden, as I was talking about in the first episode, of the iceberg that you only see this much of it. The rest of it's all down below water. And what is it doing? Hiding and waiting to attack, or waiting to destroy, or waiting to do something evil in that which is floating in the top of the water, i.e. a ship. Our lives as ships in the sea of humanity must understand that when we see an iceberg, there's danger below it. So when I am giving something away, I should never expect to get something in return. But when we do, God blesses that, and it becomes and that should be a standard in our life. Now, one of the challenges that we have in life is that we don't allow God to do what he needs to do to clean out and expose the stuff that's below surface. For instance, and I know that many of you will, I hope this triggers in you some things to think about, is that how come you feel a certain way towards a certain individual or a certain group or a certain situation? If you're taking sides in those certain situations, then I want to ask you a question. Why? Why are you doing it? Oh, because it's the right thing to do. Yeah, but you don't know what the other side's position is, or you don't know what actually transpired. What I'm trying to tell you in a loving way is that many times what we think we know or we think we see are not what's really happened. We must allow ourselves to have the Spirit of God wash over us, taking every thought captive and giving it to the Holy Spirit to scrub, dissect, remove the gold that has been heated and the things that are not good to be in the gold that makes gold pure come to the surface, and then let the Holy Spirit scrape them off and purify us, a word that we don't hear very much anymore, sanctification, where we allow God to sanctify us, in other words, make us more like him and less like the world. We find ourselves in a challenge trying to, how can I say, justify our victimhood, justify our position, justify why I am offended. Now, believe me, there are certain things you can be offended by, and you can fix them. When something stinks, you can find the source of the stink, get rid of it, and clean it and sanitize it, and then the next time you come into that room or to that place, it will smell like what you expected. You follow what I'm saying? Many things in our lives that we have suppressed and not dealt with stinks. But it's just like the guy that says, it's fascinating how that guy doesn't think that his poop stinks. But he can do whatever he feels like doing because that's what he is and that's how he is. But everybody around him knows there's a problem. And I know that's a little rough language, but my point that I'm saying is that understand who you are, understand why you're offended, and then ask God to help you forgive that situation. Now, one of the things that I think that's hard for us to grasp is that God is not a man that he could lie. So there's something you need to understand about lying. It's not in God's nature. So when someone comes to you and says, "How are you doing?" and you turn around and you're miserable and you're horrible and you say, "I'm just fine," you're lying. Now, we do this for convenience, but do it enough, you'll believe it. And the trouble is that is not what God is telling you to do. He says that's why brothers and sisters need to be in community. That's why we need to be social, and we need to be able to speak to each other with clarity and truth, which brings us to a place where we begin to receive healing from the offense that is being exposed. That's just how it is. Second, in Isaiah 55, verses 8 and 9, his ways are not our ways, and his thoughts are not our thoughts. So when you think that you're a victim, that's not God's thoughts. That's your thoughts. And if it's your thoughts, you're already in error. because sometimes we need to understand God does not recognize our offense because he took our offenses to the cross. And when he did that, he expects us to do the same. In other words, stop thinking about everything that's gone wrong and start thinking about everything that's gone right, and give God the glory and move on. I know this is harsh, but it's true. Some of the things. Now, remember something else that we need to understand, that there are false prophets in the world. Now, what do I mean by that? Matthew 7:15. Jesus called false prophets wolves in sheep's clothing. So, self-seeking men, and I'll go as far as to say self-seeking women, who give the appearance of being Christians in sheep's clothing, but have inward nature of a wolf, which means they like to hang around sheep. And then when they see one that is vulnerable, hurt, needing assistance, wounded, they pounce. Now, I know that sounds weird, but think about it this way. Isn't it interesting that when somebody becomes offended, there are certain people within the body of Christ that will come and just hang around them and nod their heads, yes, oh yeah, you're such a victim. When a reality was that they need to do what Jesus told them to do, which is call it out, and if need be, grab them by the shirt collar and drag them over to the person or the situation that caused the offense and say, what about it? I don't know about you, but it's a miracle cure for people who have got a spirit of gossip or a spirit of offense. I know that sounds weird, but it's not. But it's very true. There is such a thing as a spirit of offense. They're always looking for a reason to be offended. And people who are like that are immature. And immature people need to be treated like they're immature. In other words, they need to be corrected. And when you get correction and you do it in a loving, compassionate, truly agape way, believe me, very good things begin to happen. Now, wolves always go after the wounded, the young, and there's something else that we need to understand. 2 Timothy 3, 1 through 5, and chapter 4, verses 3 and 4. It says this, but know this, that in the last days perilous times will come, for men will be unforgiving, having a form of godliness but denying its power, and from such people turn away. Oh, gee, I mean, it says that in the Word? Yeah. For the time will come when they will not endure sound doctrine, but according to their own desires, because they have itching ears, they will heap up for themselves teachers, and they will turn their ears away from the truth. Ha! Wow. There's something. I'll think about that. Now, we need to understand that in 2 Timothy 3:7, that's being talked about here, is that always learning, but never coming to the knowledge of the truth. If Paul were alive today, he would grieve to see what was foretold, what he talked about, is actually happening. We see it happening in our churches. We see it happening from our pulpits. We see it happening in our congregations. And we see it happening in our own government. The Christians, it's amazing. When somebody of prominence does something stupid and totally off the charts, what's the first thing that happens? Those Christians on the broadcasting networks condemn them. Do they love them? Do they go and try to reconcile them? No, they do. I'm not saying that you should just go ahead and forgive them and let them keep doing what they're doing. No, they need to be dealt with. And God's the ultimate judge and the ultimate arbitrator of that. But you cannot be the one doing that because God did not call you to that. But God did call you to love them. God did call you to pray for them. So this is one of the things that we need to understand. In Matthew 24:10, and the many will be offended and will betray one another and will hate one another. Well, let me say this. Betrayal then leads to hatred with serious consequences. Anytime that we see that happen, someone who hates his brother is a murderer. 1 John 3:15. Look at this. When God says that. Well, here we are. I'm out of time. This is what I want to take us to next week. I want to deal with another thought in regards to this. Don't be an enabler. In fact, I'll touch on those. But I do want to speak to you about how could this happen to me. May the Lord bless you. May the Lord keep you. And may his light shine upon you. Whatever you do, wherever you go, whatever is going on, leave your blessing. Because I got news for you. People need it. And look like and be part of the answer, not part of the problem. May God richly bless you, and may his light shine upon you, as I said. Be there. See you next week, Lighthouse Living Room. Rabbi and I will be along shortly. See you then.